The King of the Wild Blue Sky. Now that's one heck of a nickname. But it's not the name of a superhero or a majestic bird. It's actually the nickname of a journalist. Indeed, Jerry Foster was one of the first journalists who used a helicopter to cover live news. But that's not really how he earned his nickname. You see, Jerry didn't just report news. Jerry was the news. He took action and showed up when no one else could. He was the man who saved lives and helped stop criminals. So much so that he became a national hero. He even got decorated by the US president. However, it all came crumbling down when people discovered a dark secret about him. But I promise you, he's not a bad guy, and in the end, this is a touching story with a happy ending. And Jerry's life is even more incredible when you consider his backstory. The guy was born in the 1940s from a mom who was only 14 years old when she got pregnant. And obviously, her boyfriend left as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. So yeah, Jerry didn't exactly get the best start in life. But at least his mother did the best she could to take care of him. She worked as a waitress or a cook wherever she could find a job. Eventually, they settled on a mining camp somewhere along the west coast of the USA. The kids living there don't really have school. They just have someone teaching them the basics for a couple hours a day. The rest of the time, Jerry is working in the mines, and after a hard day of work, he relaxes by smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. I know, it sounds like I'm talking about a grown-up man, but no, I'm talking about 9-year-old Jerry. 9. In the meantime, his mother finds a new boyfriend and Jerry now has someone he can call dad. Someone from whom he receives love and care. I'm just kidding, his new dad just trains him to fight. I mean, the guy is a World War II veteran, so he isn't the type to talk very much. But he still shares stories of brotherhood from his time in the Marines that truly inspire Jerry. But we'll talk about that later. Other than his new dad, Jerry can also count on his uncle Phil. Phil is his mother's brother. And let me tell you, he is a weirdo. He lives as a hermit in a shabby RV and he spends all his time prospecting for gold on a worthless piece of land where no one has ever found any gold. But Phil is probably the only one who truly believes in Jerry. Phil tells him that he believes Jerry is going to become somebody. But instead of waiting for Phil to strike gold, Jerry decides to enlist in the US Marines at just 17 years old. And right away the instructor notices his talent for shooting and his great reflexes. So Jerry is selected to enter the elite C school. But when he visits the recruit depot with his young and beautiful mom, an officer has the brilliant idea to talk about her nice butt. Without hesitation, Jerry punches that moron in the face. You do not mess with Jerry's mom. So, no elite military school for Jerry, but it's okay, he will just go to the regular infantry instead. However, just a few months later, he is drinking with his buddies when they find themselves out of alcohol. It's the middle of the night and everything is closed. But Jerry still wants to drink some more, so he sneaks into a bar to steal a few packs of beer. Unfortunately, he gets caught and it's a disaster. Jerry ends up being arrested and convicted of a felony. As a result, he is discharged from the Marines. And this is a big problem because in the meantime, his mom has lost her job and she's single again. So she really counted on Jerry to make some money. Now, Jerry feels ashamed and guilty. He doesn't want to let down his mom, so he does what he can to find a job. As a result, he ends up in Montana delivering dynamite to a gigantic work site. I'm not sure this is a kind of job you should give to someone with his record, but whatever. One day, on the work site, he sees something that will change his life forever. A helicopter. It's the 1960s and helicopters are so rare that most people have never seen one. And for Jerry, it's love at first sight. The pilot sees Jerry's enthusiasm and invites him to come aboard for a ride. When he comes back on the ground, Jerry has stars in his eyes. Now he knows what he wants to do for the rest of his life. So he goes to a flight school and begins his training. The problem is that those classes are very expensive and Jerry cannot afford them. But then his mom tells him that she will pay for it. This is weird because we just talked about the fact that she doesn't have any money. His mom being quite pretty and popular with men, Jerry gets worried about what she had to do to get the money. But she tells him not to worry. She says it's pennies from heaven. What the heck does that even mean? But now that his mom pays to support his dream, Jerry really doesn't want to disappoint her. And in 1965, he successfully obtains his pilot license. But that's to fly planes. For helicopters, he has to complete additional training and pass an exam. And on the day of that exam, the helicopter he has to fly is the most broken down piece of crap you can imagine. Up in the sky, the machine is rattling violently and threatening to fall apart at every moment. The inspector next to Jerry is absolutely terrified, but somehow Jerry manages to land the helicopter safely. The inspector is so relieved to still be alive that he gives him his certificate with no further question and quickly leaves. And honestly, the inspector's reaction is quite normal. Most people are terrified of helicopters because, unlike planes, they are unforgiving. A little mistake and it's over. But Jerry is a bit different. He wasn't scared during the flight. In fact, he is more confident than ever. And this is great, because we're in the middle of the Vietnam War, and the military desperately needs helicopter pilots. But no one wants to fly them. So despite his dishonorable discharge, Jerry is hired as a helicopter instructor for the military. And for him, it's a dream job. He does what he loves every day, and is paid for it while making his mother proud. However, it's only now that Jerry's story truly begins. It's been over 3 days since a family was reported missing in the desert. The situation is critical, but despite all their efforts, the rescue team cannot find them. And it's not surprising. People haven't had the idea to use helicopters for rescue, so all the research is done on the ground. And good luck finding anything in the rolling sand dunes of the desert with a pickup truck. People are starting to get mad at the rescue team for not making any progress, and the news spread until it reaches Jerry. Right away, he jumps in his helicopter and heads out toward the desert. And just 1 hour later, he discovers the family's car. But as he gets closer, he unfortunately realizes that it is too late. He knows that no one can survive 3 days stranded in the desert with no water whatsoever, let alone a grandma and little kids. But deep down, Jerry wasn't really prepared for this outcome. As he falls down on his knees, holding the lifeless body of a little boy, he makes a promise to himself. From there, he will always be on top of the news and get there faster, whatever it takes to avoid this kind of tragedy from happening again. 1 year later, a local television channel in Phoenix, Arizona has the idea to put a journalist in a helicopter to report on traffic news. This is Jerry's chance to learn about what's going on before everyone else, so he gladly accepts the job. It's not the first time in history a journalist is put into a helicopter, but Jerry is the man who's truly about to revolutionize the profession. However, it was far from a sure thing. The whole idea looked like it was going to be a disaster. The helicopter was actually a tiny gyroplane, but that's not the problem. No, the problem is that it was incredibly loud. So much so that people couldn't hear anything Jerry was saying. So he had to find a solution. And what he came up with is both genius and reckless. Basically, Jerry would go as high as possible and then he would turn off the engine. And for the 30 seconds he was free falling from the sky, he would do his report before turning the engine back on at the very last second. At first, the other journalists didn't take him seriously. They were quite amused to see this uneducated guy who can't even speak English properly fly with his little toy. But Jerry's corny jokes quickly made him popular among many viewers who could also relate to him more than to the usual uptight journalists. And Jerry was only getting started. Up to now, his reports were audio only, but now he wants to share some video too. For that, he brings aboard a camera and he films what he sees while keeping control of the gyroplane with his knees. Then he drops the film into a watermelon field near the TV studio so they can retrieve it and broadcast it on TV when it's time for Jerry to do his audio report. As a result, Jerry is able to show people whatever is going on instead of just doing boring interviews on the ground like everyone else. And this is a huge success, and in no time, everyone in town is watching Jerry's news report. But not everyone is happy about it. The other journalists of the town turned from mocking him to despising him. They cannot wrap their head around how this guy is able to take away their shine. But whether they like it or not, Jerry is good at what he does. In fact, he is literally bringing to life a new era of journalism. And his influence is going to be far greater than anyone could ever imagine. Someday, Jerry learns that 12 Mexicans are lost in the desert of Arizona while trying to pass the border. Any normal journalist would go on to interview the police and the rescue team, but you already know that Jerry isn't going to do that. Instead, he jumps in his gyroplane and looks for the missing people from the sky. And just a few hours later, he finds them. They're absolutely exhausted and dehydrated, but they're all alive. That evening, the story makes it to the national television where Jerry shares his motivations. Sure, there's the promise he made to himself a few years ago, but for the rest, it's not that deep. He just loves flying and the feeling he gets from saving others. And among the people who watch the interview, there's a very ambitious man. Indeed, the man in charge of KPNX TV decides to extend an offer to Jerry that he simply cannot refuse. KPNX, or simply 12 News, is a much bigger channel with a much bigger budget than his current one. So forget about the tiny gyroplane. Jerry gets a brand new state-of-the-art helicopter with sound reduction along with a huge salary increase. Fast forward to 1979. A few college students who went rafting are in big trouble. They are stuck in strong current at the bottom of a waterfall. In fact, 2 of them have already drowned in the river and the risk of another casualty increases with every second. There is no time to waste. So Jerry takes a doctor on board and they fly to the location. By the time they arrive, most students have somehow managed to make it to the shore safely. In fact, all but 1 student remains at the mercy of the current. With no hesitation, Jerry flies his helicopter just above the stranded student while the doctor, sitting on the skids, grabs the poor 19-year-old girl out of the raft. But exhausted, she slips and falls back in the river. The current is so strong that she disappears underwater instantly. But there is no way Jerry is going to let someone die right before his eyes. So he does something that people have never seen, not even in movies. He literally sends half his helicopter into the water, nose down, while the doctor, still on the skids, firmly grabs the girl and finally lifts her out the water for good. And after such a stunt, he becomes even more famous. So 12 News TV makes Jerry the identity of the channel. They even develop a technology that allows them to broadcast videos on live television directly from the helicopter. Also, Jerry finally has a real team to support him, including a talented cameraman and a sharp writer, so he doesn't have to do everything by himself anymore. But mostly, it allows him to focus on what he really cares about: saving people and stopping bad guys. And it doesn't take long before his next mission. There's a criminal running away from the police and they are about to lose him. It turns out the man is riding a horse and he's trying to escape in the mountains where they cannot follow him. Once again, it's the perfect job for Jerry, who takes part in the chase. Actually, he does even more than that. He manages to catch up with the criminal and he literally pushes him off his horse with the skids of his helicopter. The dude falls off the horse and roars down the mountain to a creek where police can finally arrest him. Another time he's even able to catch a murderer on the run all by himself. And when I say catch him, I mean it. Like, he actually put handcuffs on him, made him sit in his helicopter, and dropped him off at the nearest police station. With all these accomplishments, Jerry receives a prestigious award from the US president. He's at the top of his game. He's basically a star, especially in Arizona. People even call him the king of the white blue sky. But once you're at the top, you can only go down. And in truth, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for Jerry. Because as much as he wants to save everyone, it's impossible. Oftentimes, he arrives too late and only discovers lifeless bodies. On top of that, tragic stories about journalists trying to compete with him only to crash their helicopter and kill themselves are all too common. And Jerry struggles to live with the guilt and trauma. He always feels like he could have done better. So he constantly has nightmares. He just doesn't deal very well with death. Basically, Jerry needs a place to escape and get some peace of mind. And he finds it by hanging out with a biker gang. Like, we're talking about the kind of outlaws who commit violent crimes. I know it doesn't sound right, but let me explain. In that group, there is a sense of brotherhood that's deeply comforting for Jerry. It kinda reminds him of his time in the Marines and the stories of the man he used to call Dad. It's a sort of refuge. There, no one makes fun of how he talks, and he doesn't have to think about the people he couldn't save. But around the same time, the repeating helicopter accidents of other Jerry wannabes start to change the public's opinion. People are now demanding more rules be put in place. And to make matters worse, Jerry is facing the worst controversy of his career. You see, there was a bank robber who used a small plane to flee, so Jerry was looking for him. And at some point he found a similar plane, so he chased it and got close to it to check who was piloting it. Well, it turned out that it wasn't the man he was looking for. But the pilot complained that Jerry flew way too close to him and it put him in danger. As a result, Jerry got his license suspended. Nevertheless, he was still able to fly because he appealed the decision. But now a bridge has opened. Jerry isn't untouchable anymore, and the snobbish journalists who've always been jealous about Jerry's success take full advantage of the situation. They criticize him publicly. They say he's full of himself. They compare him to a modern cowboy who believes is above the law. But the final straw occurs a few years later. Jerry often visits schools to talk about his job, share stories, and promote drug prevention. But in 1988, one of these visits goes terribly wrong. After doing his usual speech, he goes into his helicopter and puts on a real show to entertain the kids. But during one of his aerial acrobatics, his jacket falls off the helicopter. One of the kids retrieve it, only to find a bag of grass inside the pocket. Yes, I'm talking about the kind of grass you smoke. Nowadays, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but at the time, it was absolutely unacceptable. And with hundreds of witnesses, it doesn't take long for him to face major backlash. So, to avoid more drama, he decides to quit. And for a few years, no one hears about him again. But then Jerry tries a comeback on a smaller TV channel. However, what made him special is no more. Not only do rescue teams now have their own helicopters, but every news channel also has one. And as if his public image wasn't tarnished enough, he ends up being exposed for buying hard drugs. This time he's fired, and he retires from the public eye for good. And to top it all off, right after that, his wife leaves him for his best friend, who's a guy from the biker gang. This is truly the worst period of Jerry's life. But even at rock bottom, he can still count on his Uncle Phil. If you remember, at the beginning I told you he was a bit of a weirdo. And I also told you he was looking for gold in an area where everyone was saying there wasn't any. Well, guess what? He ended up finding a ton of it, and is now actually rich. But that didn't change anything. He still lived in the same built-up trailer on the same piece of land. Now Jerry is working as a truck driver, but the rest of the time he stays with Phil, and together they spend their days watching TV and eating spaghetti out of cans. However, Jerry didn't live the rest of his life as a hermit. Many years later, Jerry's daughter gets back in touch with him, and she encourages him to open a Facebook account. Soon, he starts receiving messages from people he doesn't know. And at first, he's a bit scared to find out what these messages are about. He still feels ashamed and guilty for how his career ended. But when he finally finds the courage to open the messages, he realizes that people only remember his heroic action and not his issues with drugs. They're also grateful to Jerry for inspiring them. Thanks to him, some people became firefighters to save lives, while others became helicopter pilots. Heck, he even inspired some people to become journalists. But there was one more mystery for Jerry to uncover. Soon after his Uncle Phil peacefully passes away, Jerry returns to the trailer to sort through his stuff. In the middle of it all, he comes across a document with the name of Jerry's flight school on it. Curious, he takes a deeper look at it, and he finally discovers where the money for his flight school came from. The so-called pennies from heaven actually came from Phil, and this was way before he got rich. In fact, at the time, Phil was so broke that to secure the loan, he had to put up his trailer as a guarantee. His Uncle Phil wasn't just the only person who used to tell Jerry that he'd become somebody, but he's also the one who made it possible for him. But do you know who else loved to go up in the sky and used to be a truck driver? Laurie Walters, the man who flew away with balloons and a lawn chair. So click on the video on your screen right now to watch this story next.